Two of the most feared prison gangs in American history, the Mexican Mafia and Nuestra Familia, have been locked in a violent war for decades. It's a war fueled by power, betrayal, and blood. But this isn't just a prison rivalry. It's a deadly conflict that shaped California's prison system, spilled onto the streets, and left a brutal legacy that still impacts communities today. This is not just a story about gangs, it's about power structures built within prison walls, codes of loyalty stronger than blood, and a history that stretches back to the struggles of Mexican American communities in California. The war between La M and Nuestra Familia is a brutal reminder of how prison systems can breed powerful criminal empires. In this video, we'll trace the origins of this deadly feud, the violent battles that erupted behind prison walls, and how this ongoing war continues to influence the criminal landscape across California and beyond. From secret codes written in invisible ink to brutal assassinations carried out behind bars, this is a war that has shaped the underworld like no other. This is the story of La M versus Nuestra Familia, a war where loyalty, power, and survival come at the highest cost. The foundation for this violent feud was laid long before these two gangs ever existed. It begins with the deep socioeconomic divide between Mexican American communities in Northern and Southern California during the early to mid 20th century. Northern Californians, often referred to as norteños, came from small working class farming towns. Their lives revolved around hard labor, picking crops, and maintaining tight knit communities. In contrast, Southern Californians, known as sureños, were more urbanized, heavily influenced by Chicano culture, lowrider communities, and street gangs. This cultural division laid the groundwork for future rivalries. In the 1940s, the Bracero program brought thousands of Mexican laborers to the United States to work in agriculture, particularly in Northern California. Many of these laborers settled permanently, creating strong community bonds that emphasized hard work and family values. Meanwhile, Southern California's Mexican American communities were shaped by urban struggles, poverty, gang violence, and systemic discrimination. Chicano pride movements emerged during this period, but so did the rise of street gangs like White Fence and Clanton 14, which would later influence the culture of La M. In the California prison system, these cultural tensions boiled over as Southern Californian inmates began asserting dominance. By the late 1950s, these power dynamics would give birth to La M, or the Mexican Mafia, inside San Quentin State Prison. In the 1950s, California's prison system was a brutal and unforgiving environment, rife with racial segregation and systemic inequality. Prisons like San Quentin and Folsom State Prison were hotbeds of racial tension, and Mexican American inmates often found themselves caught in the middle, marginalized and without protection. At that time, prisons were dominated by two powerful racial factions. White prison gangs, like the Aryan Brotherhood, controlled key prison jobs, resources, and protection for white inmates. Black inmate groups, though not yet as organized into formal gangs, were beginning to build their own protective communities. But Mexican American inmates, they were largely ignored and unprotected. Despite their growing numbers within the prison system, they lacked a formalized group to represent their interests or defend them. This made them easy targets for exploitation and violence from both white and black inmate factions. Mexican American inmates often found themselves assigned the most degrading and dangerous prison jobs, tasks that other racial groups refused to take on. Inmates were often subjected to racist taunts, harassment from guards, and disproportionate punishment for minor infractions. One particularly harrowing example came from the experiences of Luis Huero Buff Flores, a young East Los Angeles gang member who would later become one of La M's founding figures. In prison, Flores witnessed Mexican American inmates being regularly beaten by guards for minor offenses, while white inmates committing similar infractions faced minimal consequences. Another inmate, Rafael Cheyenne Cadena, recalled how Mexican American prisoners were frequently denied access to educational programs and vocational training that were more readily available to white and black inmates. This exclusion further deepened the divide, creating a sense of desperation and frustration among Latino inmates. In addition to systemic discrimination, Mexican American inmates had no organized protection from racial violence inside the prison system. Stories circulated of Mexican American prisoners being targeted during riots and receiving no backup during fights. This lack of protection left many vulnerable, with assaults and robberies becoming common experiences. One significant incident took place in 1956 at Folsom Prison. During a race-fueled altercation in the prison yard, A group of white inmates attacked several Mexican American prisoners without provocation. No retaliation followed because, at the time, there was no organized Latino group to defend their own. This violent event left an impression on the prison population, highlighting the urgent need for unity among Mexican Americans. By 1957, frustration had reached a boiling point. Mexican American inmates from Southern California, many of whom had gang affiliations on the outside, began meeting in secret to discuss forming a group that could offer protection and solidarity. Founded in 1957 by Luis Huerobaf Flores, La M emerged out of a need for protection and power among Mexican American inmates who faced threats from other prison gangs. Flores, a charismatic figure from East Los Angeles, envisioned La M as a brotherhood to protect Latino inmates and consolidate their influence within the prison system. One of the early enforcers of La M was Rudy Cheyenne Cadena, who was instrumental in expanding the gang's influence. Cadena was a natural leader, intelligent, strategic, and ruthless when necessary. His ability to unite various factions under La M's banner made him a powerful figure within the prison system. Under Cadena and Flores, La M quickly established dominance in the California prison system, particularly over drug trafficking and extortion. The gang also began influencing street level operations, making alliances with Southern California street gangs and turning them into extensions of their power. One of the most enduring symbols of La M is the number 13. The letter M is the 13th letter of the alphabet, signifying loyalty to La M. Members often tattoo the number 13 or its variations, such as X3, to demonstrate allegiance. This simple number has become synonymous with fear, control, and power across Southern California. As La M grew stronger, internal rules became stricter. Betrayal, disrespect, or failure to follow orders often resulted in swift and brutal punishment, sometimes even death. The birth of Nuestra Familia in 1968 at Soledad Prison was not just a reaction, it was a rebellion. For years, Northern Californian inmates had felt disrespected and marginalized by the Southern controlled La M. The catalyst for the creation of Nuestra Familia was a prison yard incident where a La M member allegedly stole a pair of shoes from a Northern Californian inmate. This seemingly minor incident ignited a full scale riot, leading to several injuries and the solidification of Nuestra Familia as an opposing force. Founded by Northern California inmates from agricultural towns, Nuestra Familia aimed to protect Norteños from La M's influence. Early leaders like Robert Babo Sosa and Joe Gonzalez structured the gang like a military organization, emphasizing discipline and strategic planning. The gang's symbol, the number 14, represented the letter N for Norteño. Tattoos of Trotfer, the Huelga bird, and other symbols connected to the United Farm Workers movement became signs of loyalty and resistance against Southern dominance. During the 1970s, Nuestra Familia executed several high-profile attacks on La M members, including targeted assassinations inside Folsom and Soledad prisons. One of the most notable incidents was the assassination of La M leader Robert Salas in 1971, which marked a significant escalation in violence. 1. The murder of Robert Salas, 1971, a brutal message to Nuestra Familia. One of the most significant early assassinations tied to La M's rivalry with Nuestra Familia was the murder of Robert Salas in 1971. Salas, a prominent figure within Nuestra Familia, had gained influence inside Soledad prison, a hotspot for Norteño and Sureño tensions. Background: by 1971, the rivalry between La M and Nuestra Familia was already burning hot. The two gangs had been involved in a series of violent clashes in various prisons, but the assassination of Salas was a major escalation. La M viewed Salas as a direct threat to their control over drug trafficking and influence inside California prisons. The assassination, the hit was orchestrated from within San Quentin State Prison. The order reportedly came from high-ranking La M members, who wanted to send a clear message that no leader from Nuestra Familia was untouchable. Salas was stabbed multiple times in a planned attack carried out during recreation hours. Inmates armed with homemade shanks ambushed him in the prison yard, leaving Salas dead before guards could intervene. Aftermath: the killing of Salas intensified the blood feud between La M and Nuestra Familia. This assassination led to retaliatory attacks from Nuestra Familia, marking the beginning of some of the most violent periods in California prison history. 2. The murder of Fred Mad Dog Monares, 1969, Internal power struggle background. While La Eme was known for targeting rival gangs, they were just as ruthless with their own members when it came to enforcing loyalty and discipline. In 1969, Fred Mad Dog Monares, a well known La Eme associate, was marked for death after being accused of misusing gang resources and showing signs of disloyalty. The assassination. The hit was carried out inside Folsom State Prison. Monares had reportedly been skimming from drug profits controlled by La Eme's prison network. In response, the gang's leadership issued a death order. During a routine yard session, Monares was ambushed by fellow La M members and stabbed over 20 times with makeshift weapons crafted from sharpened metal. The attack was swift and violent, meant to send a chilling message to anyone considering betrayal. Aftermath. This execution cemented La M's reputation for zero tolerance toward internal disloyalty. The message was clear: any betrayal of the gang's interests would be met with swift and brutal consequences. 3. Rudy Cheyenne Cadena's death and retaliation, 1972, the failed peace attempt. Background: Rudy Cheyenne Cadena was one of the founding members of La M and a key figure in shaping the gang's power structure. Known for his intelligence and organizational skills, Cadena attempted to broker peace between La Eme and Nuestra Familia during the early 1970s, a move that was seen as controversial within his own organization. The assassination. Cadena's peace efforts ultimately led to his downfall. In 1972, during his incarceration at Chino Prison, Nuestra Familia members saw Cadena's outreach as an opportunity to eliminate a powerful rival. During a brutal ambush in the prison yard, Cadena was stabbed multiple times and left to die. Aftermath. Cadena's murder triggered one of the most violent waves of retaliation in La M's history. Following his death, La M ordered hits on Nuestra Familia members across multiple California prisons. One of the most notorious retaliations occurred in Folsom Prison in 1973, where multiple Nuestra Familia members were attacked in coordinated assaults carried out within a single week. Cadena's death transformed the rivalry from a series of violent encounters into an all-out war. 4. The assassination of Charles Charlie Brown Manriquez, 1967, a power play within La Eme background. Charles Charlie Brown Manriquez was an early influential member of La Eme who played a key role in organizing the gang's drug trade within California prisons. However, his ambitions soon put him at odds with other high-ranking leaders who saw him as a threat to their authority. The assassination. In 1967, during his incarceration at San Quentin State Prison, Manriquez was targeted for elimination. The order came directly from La M's higher leadership, who saw his growing influence as dangerous to the gang's stability. Manriquez was cornered in the prison showers by two enforcers and stabbed to death with improvised shanks. Aftermath. His assassination sent a clear message that even high-ranking members were not safe if they posed a threat to the organization's leadership. Following Manriquez's death, La Eme consolidated its power, tightening internal control and ensuring loyalty through fear. 5. The Folsom Prison Riot, 1970, a bloodbath for control background. By the 1970s, tensions inside Folsom Prison were at a breaking point. The rivalry between La Eme and Nuestra Familia had intensified following multiple assassinations, and prison officials struggled to control the mounting violence. The incident. In 1970, a full-scale riot erupted when La M members launched a surprise attack on Nuestra Familia affiliates during a routine yard session. The attack was coordinated and brutally efficient. La M members had crafted weapons from sharpened metal objects and planned the assault down to the minute. The riot resulted in the deaths of at least 4 inmates and left dozens injured. La M's objective was clear: to assert total dominance over Nuestra Familia inside Folsom. Aftermath. The bloodbath led to increased prison lockdowns and forced segregation between rival gang members. Despite heightened security, both gangs continued to communicate through coded messages and intermediaries, ensuring that the war would rage on. To understand the depth of this rivalry, you must first understand the powerful symbolism behind the numbers 13 and 14. These aren't just random digits. They represent identities, loyalties, and entire subcultures within California's criminal underworld. For La M, 13 represents the letter M, the backbone of their identity. The number is seen on tattoos, graffiti, and encoded messages passed between members. Variations like X3 or Treches are common among those who pledge allegiance to La M. In contrast, Nuestra Familia and its affiliates use the number 14 to represent the letter N. Northerners often display this symbolism through tattoos and graffiti featuring tar 14 or the Huelga bird, an emblem adopted from the United Farm Workers movement, symbolizing their connection to Northern California's working class roots. These numbers became battle flags in the ongoing war between North and South. Entire communities became divided along these lines, with deadly consequences for those caught in the middle. As the decades rolled on, the brutality between La Eme and Nuestra Familia seemed endless, until recent years brought an unexpected shift. For the first time since their violent beginnings, rumors of a possible truce began circulating behind prison walls. In the early 2000s, a significant factor began reshaping the landscape of California's prison gangs: the rise of the SNY yards, sensitive needs yards. These specialized units housed inmates who needed protection from the general population, including ex-gang members, informants, and individuals targeted for other reasons. Over time, these yards became breeding grounds for new gangs, many of which threatened the power held by both La M and Nuestra Familia. One rising faction in particular was the Northern Riders, a splinter group of ex-norteños who rejected the rigid structure and discipline of Nuestra Familia. Similar breakaway groups emerged from La Ame's ranks, including Sureño defectors. These groups didn't adhere to the same codes of loyalty, making them unpredictable and dangerous adversaries for both traditional gangs. As a result, rumors of informal peace talks between La Eme and Nuestra Familia began to emerge. By 2018, corrections officers reported that violence between the two factions had noticeably decreased inside California prisons. Reports from Pelican Bay State Prison suggested that high-ranking members of both gangs recognized the need to set aside old rivalries, at least within prison walls, to maintain power in the face of these rising threats. The question wasn't about friendship or unity, it was about survival. However, this tentative truce was not extended to the streets. In cities like Los Angeles and Fresno, violence between Sureño and Norteño affiliates remained as fierce as ever, driven by territorial disputes and control over drug trafficking routes. Here are detailed examples of recent street-level conflicts that highlight the ongoing division between prison politics and street-level warfare between La Eme and Nuestra Familia. Despite rumors of peace talks within the prison system, these incidents illustrate how, even as high-ranking prison leaders attempt to establish truces for strategic reasons, the violence continues on the streets, driven by territorial battles, personal vendettas, and gang loyalty. 1. The Salinas Turf War, 2018-2020, Norteños versus Sureños. Background: despite efforts within California prisons to de-escalate violence between La Eme and Nuestra Familia, the city of Salinas remains a hotspot for gang-related street violence. Salinas, located in Monterey County, has long been considered a Nuestra Familia stronghold, with deep ties to Norteño street gangs. The conflict. Between 2018 and 2020, a series of brutal shootings unfolded in Salinas, primarily driven by conflicts between Sureño and Norteño affiliates. One particularly violent period occurred in June 2019, when 4 gang-related shootings took place over a single weekend, leaving multiple victims injured and 2 dead. Investigations later revealed that Sureño affiliates were attempting to encroach on traditional Norteño territory, challenging Nuestra Familia's dominance in the area. These attacks were not directed by prison leaders but stemmed from local gang disputes and turf wars, illustrating the disconnect between prison politics and the realities of street-level crime. Outcome: the violent escalation forced law enforcement agencies, including the Monterey County Joint Gang Task Force, to increase patrols and launch targeted raids. However, the ongoing street-level violence in Salinas underscored how deeply ingrained these rivalries remain outside prison walls. 2. Fresno County Retaliation Attack, 2021. The price of betrayal. Background: Fresno County has been a battleground for Norteño and Sureño violence for decades. In early 2021, peace talks occurring within California prisons had little effect on the streets of Fresno, where escalating tensions between rival gangs resulted in a series of targeted killings. The conflict. On March 13, 2021, a 22-year-old suspected Sureño affiliate was shot and killed in a drive-by shooting while walking home from work. The attack was allegedly carried out by members of the local Norteño gang as retaliation for an earlier shooting involving Sureño members. The killing set off a wave of retaliation, with Sureño affiliates organizing a counterattack that left 2 people dead and injured several others at a neighborhood gathering later that month. These tit-for-tat shootings reflected long-standing territorial disputes rather than any directive from prison leadership. Outcome: despite alleged efforts to ease tensions inside prisons, the conflict in Fresno highlighted how local gang politics operate independently of larger prison-based peace efforts. Street-level gang members often act without the knowledge or consent of incarcerated leaders. 3. Los Angeles Gang Crackdown 2022. La Eme's influence on street-level turf wars. Background: Los Angeles has historically been a La Eme stronghold, with deep ties to Sureño gangs operating across the city. Despite attempts by high-ranking prison leaders to reduce violence within correctional facilities, La Eme's influence over Southern California street gangs has fueled continued violence. The conflict in February 2022, a multi-agency law enforcement operation called Operation Red Zone, targeted Sureño street gangs involved in drug trafficking and violent crime in East Los Angeles. The investigation uncovered evidence that La Eme leaders were still issuing orders from prison to maintain territorial control and enforce discipline. Shortly after the arrests, violence erupted on the streets of East Los Angeles. In March 2022, a Norteño affiliate was gunned down outside a convenience store in what police believed was a retaliatory attack from Sureño affiliates acting under orders from local leaders, not prison authorities. Outcome: these incidents revealed that even if prison leaders attempt to limit violence inside correctional facilities, La Eme's influence on street-level gangs remains powerful and deadly. The operation led to dozens of arrests, but the cycle of violence persisted. 4. San Jose Deadly Ambush 2023. Street-level betrayal ignites violence. Background: San Jose, traditionally considered Norteño territory, has seen a recent increase in Sureño activity, fueled by growing drug trafficking operations and shifting territorial lines. The conflict: in April 2023, a violent ambush outside a nightclub left 3 people dead and 4 injured. The victims were alleged Norteño affiliates targeted by Sureño gang members in retaliation for a previous shooting involving a known Sureño leader. Despite ongoing peace discussions between La Eme and Nuestra Familia leaders in prison, local Sureño gangs had been pushing aggressively into Norteño territory, violating the unspoken truce observed inside prison walls. Outcome: law enforcement investigations revealed that the attack was independently coordinated by local Sureño factions without any direct involvement from incarcerated La Eme leaders. This incident illustrated how prison-based power struggles often fail to influence real-world gang dynamics on the streets. 5. Sacramento Gang Violence Surge 2022-2023. A cycle of retaliation. Background: Sacramento has been a battleground for both Norteño and Sureño street gangs. Despite rumors of a peace treaty inside prisons, the city experienced a surge of violence throughout 2022 and 2023. The conflict: in July 2022, a Norteño gang member was fatally shot during a block party in South Sacramento. Police investigations linked the killing to a local Sureño gang, which had been attempting to reclaim lost territory. Within days, retaliatory shootings occurred, leading to a chain reaction of violence that spanned months. One particularly deadly night in January 2023 saw multiple drive-by shootings targeting Sureño hangouts, resulting in the deaths of 3 people and injuries to 5 more. This conflict had little connection to any prison-level politics. Street gangs were acting independently, driven by territorial ambitions and personal vendettas. Outcome: the surge in violence led to the launch of a specialized gang intervention task force by the Sacramento Police Department. However, the ongoing cycle of retaliation highlighted how efforts to de-escalate violence within prison walls had little influence over escalating tensions on the streets. Despite leadership within La Eme and Nuestra Familia reportedly discussing peace to combat rising threats from SNY yard gangs, like the Northern Riders and 2 to 5, street-level gang dynamics remain volatile and driven by separate motivations. These examples illustrate a fundamental truth: prison peace, street peace. Local gang affiliates often operate independently of prison leadership, driven by immediate concerns like territorial control, drug markets, and personal rivalries. Younger generations don't respect old rules. Newer gang members on the streets may feel disconnected from prison politics and old alliances, instead focusing on asserting their dominance through violence. Economic incentives. Override peace, competition over drug distribution, extortion rackets, and illegal gambling often leads to conflicts that outweigh any efforts at prison peace. The legacy of the war between the Mexican Mafia and Nuestra Familia is one of bloodshed, fear, and enduring influence. Entire generations of Californians have lived in the shadow of this violent rivalry. Entire neighborhoods in Los Angeles, San Jose, and Salinas continue to feel the impact of these gangs, where graffiti of 13 or 14 marks territories, and the fear of retaliation looms heavy over everyday life. Despite decades of law enforcement intervention, prison segregation policies, and community outreach programs, the influence of La Eme and Nuestra Familia remains deeply embedded in California's criminal landscape. However, there is hope. Former gang members, like David Rocha, who once held influence within Nuestra Familia, now work to break the cycle of violence. Rehabilitation programs, mentorship initiatives, and education campaigns are slowly chipping away at the power these gangs hold. Yet, even today, prisons remain segregated by gang affiliation, and new generations continue to be drawn into this deadly rivalry, fueled by poverty, systemic inequality, and a desire for power and respect. The rivalry between the Mexican Mafia and Nuestra Familia isn't just a story about gangs, it's about power, survival, and fear. From the prison yards of San Quentin to the streets of California, this war has left a brutal legacy that continues to shape the world of organized crime. If you found this deep dive into gang history insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more true crime stories every week. Stay safe, and remember, in the world of organized crime, nothing is ever as simple as it seems.